1, 2, 2, 2, 2.
Good morning. Thank you so much for being here on this beautiful spring day. I'm Sarah Hale. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at the American Action Forum. Just want to thank you all for being here. I know that Bono is on the Hill this morning, so I'm especially grateful that you chose to be with us. We have a panel this morning on the rise in college tuition, which is a perennial issue, as you all well know. We have a couple of papers that I need to mention out in the front for pickup for you to peruse now or later on. One is a summary of a study by two of our panelists, Dr. Gordon and Dr. Hedlund, accounting for the rise in college tuition, and the other is by our very own Chad Miller, who will be moderating our panel today. That is a state-by-state assessment of that model that they put together. It's my great pleasure to introduce Representative Virginia Foxx this morning from North Carolina's 5th District. I'm used to saying 9th District because I used to work for Sue Myrick. So I'm very proud that she's here with us today. She's the chair of the Higher Ed and Workforce Training Subcommittee at the House Ed and Workforce Committee, also the vice chair of the Rules Committee, and very active in the Republican Conference. Dr. Foxx brings a host of higher education experience with her to Congress. She has been an instructor, an administrator at several different North Carolina higher ed institutions, and she was even a community college president. She's both a Tar Heel and a Spartan, having gone to Chapel Hill for undergrad and Greensboro for her doctorate. And what I've always found especially interesting about Representative Foxx is that she actually knows what it's like to be a first-generation college student, to be the first in her family to go, to be a person who didn't have a lot of means to go to school, and what that means and what that's like. And I think that's an important perspective to have in the House. Some people use the word tireless to describe a lot of members of Congress, but I think for Dr. Foxx it's maybe especially true. She's had 8 of her own bills signed into law since 2005, which was her first term in the House. And though she's frequently rated among the most conservative members of the House, she's demonstrated an ability to get bills through in a bipartisan and bicameral way, and that's obviously important. She's had a special emphasis on a permanent solution to student loan interest rate issues and regulatory relief in higher ed. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Representative Foxx. You're very welcome.
Thank you. Well, I'm glad to be with you all this morning. Sorry we were running a little late. We ran into some terrible traffic out there. Where are all these people going at 10 o'clock in the morning, you know? I don't know. But anyway, as Sarah told you, I am truly an educator at heart and by trade. Somebody introduced me the other day as a former educator, and I said, I'm not sure you ever are a former educator. I was the president of a community college, and I actually left the university to go to community college because I saw the potential for what happens in community colleges. I love the flexibility that exists in community colleges. And you all have always heard the old saying that it's easier to turn a battleship than it is to make changes in a university. And I think we've known that for a long time, and we're experiencing it even more so now. When I was at Appalachian State University, I worked as assistant dean. I ran actually a federal program, Upward Bound Special Services, for disadvantaged students. And as Sarah said, I was a very disadvantaged person growing up. But at Appalachian, I had the greatest opportunity to work with a dean who had vision, and we did all kinds of things in the 70s that I thought were going to catch on all over the world and are just now catching on. We had a residential college. We had students taking college courses in the high school. I was able to work with, give competency-based credit to people. Just wonderful kinds of things like that in the 70s at Appalachian State University, as I said, that I thought would catch on everywhere and that are just now catching on. Now, I don't know about most of you and your background, but I often ask people, particularly who are in private business or even in education, how many of you feel that the federal government makes your job easier? There aren't too many people in the country who feel the federal government makes their job easier. And so all my life, my husband and I, Sarah didn't mention this, my husband and I ran a nursery and landscaping business for almost 40 years. So on the side, on weekends and holidays and things, I worked in the private sector. So I've actually had two totally different life experiences and been frustrated by all of them. I was on a school board for 12 years, and I actually preached not obeying federal rules at times because they didn't make sense. So, I've been sort of a radical all my life. But unfortunately, our Department of Education, in my opinion, doesn't cherish the kind of flexibility that I think can exist out there in higher education, and constantly wants to create red tape and hoops and believes it knows better than all of the folks out there. What our higher education subcommittee is focused on doing is removing barriers in higher education, spurring private enterprise, innovation, job creation, and reducing the size and scope of the federal government's role in higher education. Truth be known, if I had my way about it, I'd be a strict constitutionalist when it comes to education. The word isn't there in the Constitution. It isn't the role of the federal government to be involved in education, and I'd get the federal government out altogether. But God has not put me in charge, and so I can't do that. So I work with what I've got. But a lot's happening quickly. We're living in a world where things are rapidly changing, and what I think we can do under reauthorization is take into consideration a lot of the changes that are occurring in our society as a whole. But let me tell you, we have 4 major principles that we work with in the subcommittee: empowering students and families to make informed decisions, simplifying and improving student aid, promoting innovation, access, and completion, and ensuring strong accountability in a limited federal role. Again, I realize we're not going to get the federal government out of education. So the alternative to that, in my opinion, is to create really, really strong accountability, which then will hold the people's feet to the fire who are getting hardworking taxpayers' dollars. We all know that the cost of education, particularly higher education, has risen dramatically. That you're going to talk about that in your panel. It isn't the role of the federal government to clamp down on the cost. It's really the cost of higher education really rests with the leaders of each institution. But, and higher education shouldn't be in the business of price control. However, we must recognize what cost the rules from the federal government impose on higher education. And if we can reduce the unnecessary and burdensome requirements for reporting and keeping track of things, then we can help with the reduction of the cost. And what that's one of the things I want to do. I mentioned earlier that I had a lot of experience at Appalachian State University and at the community college level with doing things differently and promoting the cause of students instead of the cause of the institution or the cause of administrators. I've often said that education is not designed for students, it's designed for administrators. Make it as easy as possible for administrators to operate. But it's such an exciting time to be involved in higher education, I think. Probably the most exciting time in the history of humanity because so many opportunities are out there. We have tremendous technology now that we've never had before. I often tell the story that in 1962, I dropped out of college after one semester because I had no money. And my grandparents were Italian immigrants, my father's parents. I went to New York and worked for 6 months, slept on their couch in the living room, very small apartment that they lived in. I got up early every morning and watched, just for audit, I didn't take it for credit, a Russian literature course that was being broadcast on TV in New York. I don't even know which school did it, but I bought the book and I read the plays and I read the literature, and I thought, wow, this is the wave of the future. 1962, and we're still just in our infancy with distance learning. So again, I thought these things were going to come along a long time ago, but if we do more of them, having people take courses online through television, every medium that's available to us, we can help students fast track their learning, leverage their life and work experiences, and get through with college and make it a lot less expensive. I often point out to people that if we had government regulations on cell phones like we have in other parts of our lives, we wouldn't have the fabulous cell phones that we have now. The reason we have such great cell phones is because the government hasn't regulated them. Not because it didn't want to regulate them, but they've been beaten back from regulating. But just imagine what we have in education as a result of so many government regulations, and just compare it to the cell phone. Y'all are all too young to remember the first cell phones that came out. They weren't even cell phones, they were bag phones that fit over the console in your car. Huge things. Now, they were a hell of a lot better than the ones we got now. You got better signals with them, but anyway. So I'm a big believer in distance learning, and we want to do what we can to promote distance learning. You're not going to hear me ever say the word require as it comes from the federal government with things to do in education, except, again, in the way of transparency and accountability. Again, competency-based education. I think students have to take a lead in this in a lot of ways and go to the institutions and force them to do more in competency-based, giving them the credit that they need. Seat time has never been the best way of measuring learning. In fact, I think most of the time now people are graduating from college and we have no idea what they know or can do. And we're going to soon have to start knowing more about that. We approved in 2005 an instructional program that uses direct assessment of a student's learning to be eligible to participate in federal student aid programs. but the department only began approving a small group of competency-based programs in 2013. Again, talk about turning a battleship, getting the department to come along with rules and regulations that implement the laws that we pass. I think in some ways the members of Congress are way ahead of the department in this area. We do need evaluations, don't get me wrong. I think that it is part of our responsibility to give as much in the way of objective evaluations as we can, but ultimately people are going to have to make their own choices about where they go to school, how much they're willing to pay. But I do think that people could benefit from our setting standards for these things. So we know that the minimum price of admission for many students to begin their careers is a college education, a college degree. Make sure I say it the right way. And we don't want students priced out of that opportunity. We don't want to focus also only on punitive measures, which is what the Department of Education unfortunately focuses on most of the time. And Washington's automatic reflex is, when in doubt, regulate and punish. We need to be doing the other way around. We need to be promoting innovation. We need to be promoting ways to get an education in the most efficient, effective, and cost-benefit way. So we're going to continue to talk about these things. We hope to have some legislation out later this year. But I can't tell you exactly when right now. So let me stop there and see what kind of questions you have. They wanted y'all to ask more questions than I talked, so I didn't have a clock back there, so I don't know whether I did. Sarah, would you hand me that water? Sorry, I left it. No problem. Thank you so much.
If you'd like to ask a question, please remember to identify yourself and go ahead and ask your question in the form of a question. Anyone?
I'm on the panel next, so you'll hear enough out of me. But I'm Andrew Kelly from the American Enterprise Institute. I actually didn't know that detail about working on Upward Bound at Appalachian State in your bio. That's interesting. That raised a question for me. Is it your sense that the federal investments we make in student aid and in college access programs, do we know enough about the cost benefit there and which ones are effective? And could you just tell me a bit about, is that one of your priorities?
Absolutely.
Sure.
Yeah. I consider myself a hardworking taxpayer, and I represent over 700,000 people, half of whom are hardworking taxpayers. I have family members who work in factories, and every time I think about spending money, I think about my sister, who's in her 60s and is still working in a factory in a somewhat dangerous job. She told me a couple of weeks ago she did something dumb and almost injured her hand pretty badly. And so I think about her every time I am asked to spend money. Are citizens getting a return on this spending? I don't call it investment. You'll never hear me use that term in spending hardworking taxpayers' dollars, because I think individuals know how to invest their money better than the federal government knows how to spend their money. So I've often told people I ran a pretty good Upward Bound Special Services program, and we did have accountability. I mean, I followed the rules. I only admitted the students that were supposed to come in. I kept track of what happened to them. And actually, our students graduated at a higher rate than the students coming into Appalachian the regular way. And as long as I was there, we kept those kinds of records. Now all you hear from those people are anecdotal stories. And I just tell them all the time, don't come to me and ask me to give you money or more money until you can prove to me that you're making a difference. But I think that's true with all federal dollars, again, not just education. I think at the state level, and at the federal level, we tend to pick on education a lot. But I want every program to prove that it is spending its money well. Tell me what the objectives are and show me how you did it. We need a lot more accountability. You know, we got the Skills Act passed. The Senate changed the name from Skills, which was a perfectly wonderful name for it because it focused on what we were doing, to the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, the old Workforce Investment Act. Well, we're spending $18 trillion a year on workforce development, and we have no idea what we're getting for that money. And to me, the best part of that bill was getting into it accountability measures. Now, it's going to take a long time before we see the results of those, but we don't know in most cases what we're getting for the money that we're spending. And I think Republicans have established now a good pattern, particularly in the House, for saying we're going to have accountability on everything that we do.
Thank you, Ms. Foxx. Chad Miller,
Yes,
Ed
Chad.
Policy Director here at the American Action Forum. You touched on in sort of your comments the burdens, the regulatory burdens that have been placed on higher education. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the actions that the committee are exploring, what steps they could take to sort of reduce the red tape for institutions.
Well, I think, again, we need the institutions to help us with this, and we've talked with them about it. Show us where the duplications are. They know them better than we do, and certainly the department's not going to reveal these things with us. And we just don't have the staff, Chad, to ferret all this out. So we're asking the institutions to tell us, you know, how many times do you have to report the same information to the federal agencies, and how can we simplify that? And that's one of the things we are working on, that we want to force the department to do. But it's like the example I used a few minutes ago. We can pass a law in 2005, and it's 2013 before we can get the department. And that's the other thing I tell people. We're not going to change this overnight, but if we don't start somewhere, it's never going to change. But it's going to take diligence on the part of members like me and future members to do the oversight that needs to be done. But I just don't think you should have to do it over and over. But I will have to tell you, I went in for, regular checkup recently on a couple of things. I filled out the same damn forms 3 or 4 times. And these hospitals have that information on file. It's everywhere. It's everywhere. And I keep saying, why can you not put this? I thought we were going to have a patient record or something, but you got to do it over and over and over again. Our systems are just crazy. I, again, use the ATM as an example. If the banks can create an ATM machine that gives you money, which is, the most important thing in our culture, why in the world can the federal government not create a way to keep a piece of information together and not have to have you duplicate it over and over and over again? But I also read this article years ago that said mediocrity is all we're ever going to get in federal government. And so we don't have the people designing the ATM machines working in the federal government, unfortunately. And we're not smart enough to go outside and get it done. But anyway. Other questions? Nope. Well, oops, there you go. I was about to get out.
This morning's news, we heard President Obama indicating they're going to have to get additional funding for Zika, and they're using Ebola funds, leftover funds there, looking at leftover funds in many different places, and the Congress is reluctant to approve anything. What can be done about this? Any thoughts?
The taking leftover funds, well, I'm convinced that's what's keeping Obamacare afloat these days, and as long as the president's in office, they're going to shift money for wherever they can get it into whatever their priorities are. You're right. We ought to be doing a much better job. At the state level, I served 10 years in the state Senate. We were able to do a much better job of capturing the funds that weren't spent at the end of the year. This is one of the areas that the House has been working on a lot, is oversight. We don't get much credit for this. There are weeks when we have 80 oversight hearings. Most of the weeks it's between 30 and 40. And part of what we're doing is trying to regain some control over the executive branch. And one of the ways of doing that is to figure out exactly where the money's going and how it's being spent. Again, that accountability. And bring that money back, claw that money back into the Treasury. Again, states do a much better job of that than the federal government does. And we have lots of ideas of things that we want to do. It would help us if we had a Republican president, we think, to be able to do some of these things that have been percolating for the last 6 or 8 years, since there's been much more of a focus on oversight than there had been previously. So one of the things we need to do is to get back our Article I authority, where it is we who are appropriating the money and not the executive branch that is appropriating the money based on what it knows it has. Again, I learned this a long time ago just by working at a university where I was working when I first came in to run the Upward Bound program. The director was a failed director, and they brought me in to save the program, basically. And they had to shuffle things around to get the authority to do that. And I learned that both from the federal government level and at the university level, that the person who has the purse strings has a hell of a lot of power and can move those things around when they want to and make something work or not make something work. And so that's happening every day. If I had my way about it, in North Carolina, there is something called a BD 109. Every single position in the state of North Carolina has a number. And when positions are funded, it's that number that's funded. We don't do that at the federal government level. We have no idea how many positions we have. We have no idea. We have started writing into legislation, and I have to say I'm really proud of this because I led the way on this, saying if we eliminate a program, we've eliminated a lot of programs under my bills, you have to eliminate those positions. But we can't track that in the federal government like you could track it at the state level. That means just simple accounting principles that need to be put into place. But it'll take a while to get that done. Okay.
All right,
Thank you all very much.
Please join me in thanking
Oh.
Representative Foxx.
Thank you much.
And we'll just get the stage set up for the panel, and we'll be right back.
No, I don't. I just think put those two together and you two together. Here, why don't you guys scoot down so Andrew and Neal can be together and you and. Is this hot? Mine. All right, well, welcome, and thank you all for joining us today. Here at AAF, we try and examine federal education policies ranging from early childhood to adult education. But lately, like many Americans, our interests are piqued by higher education finance. For the better part of 150 years, the federal government has recognized the importance of higher education. In the early years of federal involvement, the initial investment focused on direct aid to the institutions themselves. Modern aid, however, focuses on policy of universal college access. The goal has been to ensure that income, gender, race, religion, geography are not barriers to the college attendance. To achieve this goal, the federal government, over the past 50 years or more, has focused on policies directing aid to the students themselves rather than the institutions. This aid generally takes the form of grants and loans that most of you are familiar with. Unfortunately, for many potential students today, the promise of college education is fading. Over the past 30 years, we've seen college tuition has more than doubled, outpacing inflation by as much as 2 to 4 percentage points, while pushing up the volume of student loan debt. The cost of college, coupled with historic debt levels and uncertain labor markets, has pushed the dream of college degree a little further out of reach. And that's what brings us here today. Two of our panelists have recently completed research that shed some lights on the factors driving the rise in college tuition. We will hear from them as they present their research and findings. And afterwards, we'll engage our other panelists to get their takes on the study. And we can then, assuming we have time, discuss a little bit about the shortcomings of current federal education policy, and then finally wrap up discussing some proposals of federal education policies that we should be looking towards to sort of make sure that we get the most return out of taxpayer investment for student aid. So anyway, our panel today includes, starting at the end, Andrew Kelly from the American Enterprise Institute. Andrew's the resident scholar and director of AEI's Center on Education Reform. Neal McCluskey, Cato Institute. Neal is the director of Cato's Center for Educational Freedom. Gordon Gray from the Department of Economics, Indiana University. I'm sorry, I knew that was going to happen. Here at AAF, we actually have a Gordon Gray that works here. Thought about that way too much. Knew that was going to happen. Gray is the co-author of Accounting for the Rise in College Tuition. And we also have Aaron Hedlund, Department of Education, University of Missouri, and also co-author of Accounting for the Rise in College Institution.
Actually, I don't want to correct you again. Department of Economics as well.
Did I say education?
Yeah, it's fine though.
Yeah. So I'll turn to you guys first to sort of present the paper. Just so you guys know, and I think we talked about this before, the paper is out front. If you don't, the summary of the paper is out front. If you guys want to grab that either on the way in or out. Turn to you guys to sort of present your findings and tell us a little about the research.
Okay, well, perhaps I'll begin and then Aaron can fill in anything I miss. So tuition has gone up a lot over time. We look at 1987 to 2010, and in particular the after discount price of tuition, net tuition, has basically doubled over that time period in real terms, so after adjusting for inflation. And there's no shortage of theories explaining or suggesting why tuition might be going up over time. So perhaps the most famous is the Baumol cost disease problem, which says college costs are rising because it's just us standing in front of chalkboards. And it's been like that for 100 years, and if we went and worked somewhere else, they'd have to pay us so much, and that's growing over time, so they have to pay professors more over time, even though we're not as productive, or even though our productivity is not growing. So that drives up college costs, and that gets passed on tuition, in terms of tuition. Perhaps the most controversial theory is the Bennett hypothesis, which goes back to a 1987 op-ed piece in the New York Times, where William Bennett said, what's been driving tuition increases, although Andrew might correct me on this later, has been increased financial aid. So if you increase students' ability to pay for school, you also increase the ability of colleges to charge higher tuition. So that's a potential driver of tuition increases. A third is a third theory is just that the return to college has gone up drastically. Currently, if you graduate from a 4-year school, on average you're going to earn around 90% more than someone who didn't. So that's a huge return. That's gone up over time. It used to be around 60% back in the 80s, late 80s. So with that extra demand for college, maybe colleges are able to charge higher tuition. And the fourth sort of popular theory is that reductions in aid to schools, as Chad sort of alluded to, have been passed on to students in the form of higher tuition. So what we do is we use an economic model to test these four theories. And what we find is that the largest single factor is increases in borrowing limits. And in particular, the introduction of the unsubsidized student loans back in 1993, I believe. That really, 1992, Felicia? Okay. That substantially increased people's ability to pay for school, but also grants and the increase in how much college graduates make play a large role as well. So in our model, or our model assumes that colleges effectively collude with each other, which could exaggerate some of these effects. In particular, colleges are acting like a monopolist who can get a lot of tuition out of students if they really want to go to school. But what we find is our model, although it has that feature, it captures these trends in not only college tuition over time, but also college spending. And it's broadly consistent with some empirical estimates. So in terms of, one sort of shocking paper is by Salini and Golden. They find that at for-profit schools, we look at nonprofits, but at for-profit schools that are federal student loan program eligible, tuition's around 75% higher than at schools that aren't eligible for federal student loans. But there's also this paper by New York Fed economists Luca, Nadal, and Shen that found if you increase, say you give $100 more in subsidized loan borrowing, that translates into tuition increase on the order of $65. So that's called a pass-through rate. Our pass-through rates are actually lower than that. They're around 15% in our model. So it's consistent with that. And also, some estimates have the pass-through rate for grants. So if I give you $100 in grant, how much does tuition go up? Some of the micro estimates for that are around $85. So our pass-through rate is actually basically 100 for that. But in the data, these micro estimates suggest that's very high as well. So our model is broadly consistent with the data and empirical estimates, and it predicts that increases in borrowing limits are the #1 factor driving tuition increases.
Yeah, I'll just make a couple clarifying remarks. So I would say, broadly speaking, the debate has come down to, has tuition gone up because it's just like a lot of other service industries, and that's where Boehmel cost disease comes in. And the example that was first brought up by Boehmel decades ago was basically about performing arts or the opera. The idea is that, all sectors of the economy have to compete for workers. So if productivity is going up in many sectors of the economy, wages go up in those sectors. But that also means that even in sectors that don't see productivity going up, they still have to raise the wage, because otherwise no one's going to want to work in that sector. So in somewhere like opera, you still need a certain number of people on the stage, and that can't really change so much. So wages go up there, and the only way that they can manage to actually pay those higher wages is to basically increase ticket prices. So that's kind of the so that would be kind of one explanation for college tuition. It's like every other service industry. Basically, you've got one professor, a certain number of students in the class, so you have to raise tuition to cover the higher salary. Or there are these alternative theories basically that emphasize the uniqueness of higher education. And as Gray mentioned, we've found that in our work, the biggest factors are basically increases in aid through borrowing limits, and then also the fact that the rewards to getting a college degree are higher. And it's important also, just for interpretive, how to interpret these things. Even in our model, tuition goes up strongly in response to these borrowing limits. These colleges are not looking to soak students, right? They're not trying to hurt students. That may be a result. What they're trying to do is they're trying to maximize their quality, their reputation. So if you think that colleges tailor their activities to move up U.S. News rankings or some other similar sort of thing, that's the kind of objective that we have in our model. So colleges want a good student body, and they want to have a high reputation. And the key thing is, we are, I think, correctly focusing on what's called net tuition, right? So you hear oftentimes in the news about how Yale or somewhere else, it's like $65,000 a year, but that's not always the best way to look at things, because in reality, colleges, they might have a sticker price tuition, but then through various internal scholarships and otherwise, some students who go there don't pay nearly that. So we're actually looking at that final net price that each student pays, which differs by student type. And that has gone up by 100% over the past 25 years. And it is that number that we find to be very responsive to the increase in aid, particularly at the lower end, right? So exactly those students who have benefited, or I should say, had access, greater increase in access to loans, it is tuition for those students that has gone up more than for other students.
Okay, great. So, Andrew, I'll let you go first. Just opening response.
But that's great. Thanks to the authors for their work, and as I said to them before we started, thanks especially for the summary of the work, which for somebody with a Ph.D. in political science is much more penetrable than the math. It's been a while since I had my formal theory course in graduate school. I sort of locate their work as one of a number of new studies that have emerged that seem to add more support to the Bannon hypothesis than I think we necessarily had a decade ago. You might think that the emerging evidence is changing minds on the part of some of DC's trade associations, but lest you believe that, last year the American Council on Education, Terry Hartle, who's their communications person over at ACE, which is the big umbrella organization for higher ed, wrote about a CRS study commissioned by Congress to study the Bannon hypothesis, where they looked at 9 studies. Hartle concluded the CRS report makes it clear that it is impossible to demonstrate, based on the available research, that there's any direct relationship, and certainly no causal relationship, between federal student aid and institutional tuition decisions. 1 year later, just last month, a new headline from ACE read, "New report, federal aid rarely affects tuition policy at colleges and universities." And they concluded there that the Bannon hypothesis, this was a paper by Archibald and Feldman, the Bannon hypothesis is probably confined to 2 types of institutions. Non-selective private institutions serving primarily low and middle income students, of which there are a lot. And the burgeoning for-profit sector that largely educates older, non-traditional students who rely extensively on federal aid to finance their schooling. So maybe we're making some progress. They went from it being impossible to demonstrate any kind of relationship to it probably exists among these sets of institutions. Consider me fully in the camp of believing in the Bannon hypothesis. But I wanted to make a few points about their paper, about this existing literature, and then about some potential solutions to some of these issues. So 3 quick points about the paper, and these aren't criticisms of the paper so much as they are to illustrate the complexity of looking at this topic. And it's 3 sources of heterogeneity, right? And there's heterogeneity across students. Obviously, students have different ability levels and different abilities to pay, but we also have heterogeneity in terms of dependents and independent students have dramatically different loan limits. So dependent undergrads can only borrow up to $31,000 lifetime limit over the course of their career. Independents can borrow $57,500, a marked difference. And of course, the distribution of students has changed quite a bit since the 80s. There are more independent students. There are more what you'd call non-traditional students in college today than there used to be, and they have higher loan limits. So you're sort of you have this new crop of people that are able to borrow a lot more, which you might expect would change some of the college's incentives and pricing behavior. And I think your paper, I think, acknowledges this. I look, the table that sort of discussed the loan limits, it acknowledges it, but it wasn't quite clear whether your enrollment data actually separated out independence and dependence, and the differences there that might occur because of that. Heterogeneity across institutions, public and private is an obvious one, right? Their tuition setting behavior is going to be different, right? Public institutions are often governed by the state. In California, if you're a community college, you have a cost per credit hour that's basically mandated, right, by the state. It's very cheap. Privates have much more autonomy. Tuition setting autonomy in general varies tremendously across states. But there's other ones. One of which we discussed very briefly earlier this morning, which is there's a subset of institutions, namely for-profit colleges, that because of federal rules around their revenue, so federal rules on eligibility for federal aid programs, if you're a for-profit college, you have to get at least 10% of your revenue from non-federal sources. And so what happens, according to the for-profit colleges anyway, what happens is when federal loan limits increase, there's a mechanical effect on their tuition because they have to ensure they're still getting 10% from non-federal sources. So if you think about it, if loan limits suddenly increase and the institution says, oh gosh, now we're getting 95% of our revenue from federal sources, right? They have to then up their tuition to make sure that students have to go to the private market or to some other place to get that money. So that's sort of this mechanical relationship in this one subset of institutions, which makes things interesting. And then the time period studied here, 2010 is sort of almost right in the middle of some of the more chaotic trends, right? So you're not quite seeing the state disinvestment trend. It was already existent, and state disinvestment is kind of the catch-all term that people use. But changes in state investment patterns, let's say per student, those sort of that sort of starts at the start of the recession, and then it really bottoms out sort of in 2011, 2012, and now it's come back up again. At the same time, though, you have this big expansion in the Pell Grant program, right? Because of the healthcare, because first of the stimulus package, but then also of the reform to convert everything to direct lending, using the savings to reinvest in the Pell Grant program to expand it. So it's entirely possible that those including those years in your model wouldn't change your findings at all, but I'd be interested to see. 3 quick points about the literature, and Gray sort of alluded to this. So I think that asserting that the Bennett hypothesis is a causal story, that increases in federal student aid cause increases in tuition, is actually a misreading of Bennett. He actually said in his piece, point blank, federal student aid policies do not cause college price inflation, but there is little doubt that they help make it possible. And so I think, for me, when I think about this literature, setting the bar at causality, I think actually sets it sort of artificially high, right? In some sense, if federal student aid is an enabler of tuition increases, but it doesn't necessarily mechanically increase them, the effect of increasing student aid is largely the same, right? From the perspective of consumers, right? You're still paying more. And the point is that some colleges will raise tuition immediately after loan limits increase. They're going to try and capture that aid. If you're a for-profit college, you might have to because of the 90-10. Others will just want to capture the aid. Others will raise tuition when they need or want more revenue, either because they want to spend more or because they're receiving less money from the state, right? They can do so in part because more aid enables students to pay higher prices. And so to me, student aid, whether it's causal or not, and I should say that it's the interest groups and the sort of advocates that have taken the difficulty in identifying a causal effect and absolutely run with it, right? And said, see, it's really hard. You can't actually find causality, so it must not be true, right? There must not be a grain. It's impossible to demonstrate, right? So for me, I'm just sort of like, well, let's just like let's just look at it on its face, and and look at some of the literature that suggests it enables. So that I think is the big point. I do want to say just one quick thing about my reading of the literature is that there seems to be there's obviously different effects on different types of institutions and for different aid programs. It seems reasonably right. The New York Fed study, for instance, finds that that Pell Grants have a much smaller effect on tuition inflation than they find for subsidized loans. And when they control for additional variables, they find that effect largely disappears. Likewise, there seems to be a sense that it's nonprofit private colleges, and particularly selective nonprofit private colleges, that are doing most of the pass through on the Pell Grant program and on the federal loan capture. So, that doesn't raise a question about whether we should sort of regulate those colleges differently, but it suggests that there's probably there's different effects. And if you include all different types of colleges in the same model, right, you might actually be missing some of that heterogeneity that I mentioned earlier. So real quick, just some possible solutions to this.
Actually, Andrew, let me hold you on the solutions.
Oh, sure.
Just so we can bring Neal in and talk about the paper more. We're going to circle back to solutions. We can talk about
Great.
Some.
Well, because I let you go first, I don't have really much left to say, because you even quoted Archibald and Feldman, and I was all set to talk about
sorry,
them.
Neal. I said I was going to let him go first. And
I know, this is how it goes. I'll never be collegial again. But I do, I'll echo one thing and won't be terribly redundant. I want to thank AAF and you guys for the studies and bringing attention to studies, because I think you're right. If you look back, actually I remember we had a forum on the Bennett hypothesis, maybe it was 8 years ago, and a friend of yours, Sarah Goldrick-Rabb, had seen it, and she wrote in her blog post that she couldn't believe that people were talking about this because it's been so thoroughly disproven. And I sort of thought, I don't know that it's been disproven. And so I think things have changed a lot in that time with your research and other research that has really begun to demonstrate empirically that this is a problem, that student aid may not cause price inflation, but it certainly fuels it or enables it. And I actually think there are a lot of causes. I think a lot of ways it manifests itself, just like you said. So I won't get into all of them. I will definitely repeat the thanks. I do think it's worth noting that absolutely, I think a big part of this problem is it just enables colleges to raise their prices. I think there's also some evidence, though, that it has other effects that one way or another make it so the aid isn't making college more affordable. I actually think there's some truth to states reduce their funding for colleges, and then the colleges raise their prices to make up for that loss of direct funding. But some of that is no doubt enabled because legislators say we can reduce our funding. There's been research, I think, just came out the last few weeks on this. We can reduce our funding and it'll be made up for by public funding. So you have a substitution effect there. You also have a substitution effect where colleges will say, well, if you increase the Pell Grant or you increase loan eligibility, we can decrease our own institutional aid to certain students. Maybe we redirect it to high achieving students so we can rise on the US News rankings. So it's more than just immediate price inflation. I think there's a lot of substitution going on where people say, we'll just take those federal taxpayer monies and reduce either state money or institutional money. And I think those are things worth looking at. I should also note, as you pointed out to me, I keep a list of a lot of these studies. There are now 13 on my list. I may have missed some, there seems to have been like a spurt in the last year or two of really good studies starting to look at this. But again, I think before we start talking too much about solutions, it's crucial that we continue to emphasize that this is a problem. Talk about the evidence that it's a problem, because you do have American Council on Education. Other groups that represent colleges, some that represent students, will say it's not a problem, just keep the money going. And it's, even though when we were talking earlier, people say, well, it seems like economics 101, where if you increase the money, the demand goes up and the price goes up. But colleges are kind of a black box. What happens to all money is difficult. The whole problem of sticker prices are actually very different from what people pay. These are all problems, so this explanation needs to continue. But I do think it's sort of reaching the public consciousness that at least something's wrong, which is why you see the Clinton campaign and the Sanders campaign both talking about we need to do something to control the price of college. It's too high, and there even seems, if you read these plans, to be a recognition that if you give students aid, colleges will raise their prices and maybe even use it for things that are not immediately valuable in an educational sense. So we see, it's anecdotal, but we talk about there are now several universities that have water parks. And people say, oh, well, the water parks, it's a separate flow of funds. That was a pun for anybody. And I just thought of that. I didn't write that down. In any event, but so they'll say that's different, it's totally unrelated. But of course it's not unrelated. If you have somebody else pay for the educational component, then you as a student may be willing to say, well, I'll pay an extra fee for the water park. And I think that's something that hasn't been mentioned here today that's also important. Part of this is not just that colleges are money grubbing. Actually, they're like everybody else. They want as much money as they can get. But they also do have to compete for students. And a lot of the competition is based on amenities. There's been research that actually shows suggests that other than the top academic students, many students make their decisions based on the amenities of a school because you're all part of one system. And so it's also colleges saying, look, we have to respond to the demands of students. And often those demands are fueled by someone saying, here is a whole lot of money. With this money, you may demand lots of things that you wouldn't ask for if you were paying yourself. And it may be the water park or the climbing wall or the deluxe food or whatever it is. So there's a demand side to this that the aid is really responsible for. Do you want to hold off on solutions?
I do.
Okay, then I'm done.
He's the boss.
Well, actually, Neal, you were just touching on some of the questions I had, and Aaron, I think you touched on it in your initial remarks, which you guys in your paper had a finding that where you estimate that colleges could save as much as $3,600 a year on quality enhancing activities. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that and how we could tie that into what Neal was talking about with, which poses a question, is there an arms race, right, amongst institutions of higher education? And is this sort of need for first-class amenities driving up the cost of capital improvements? And then are those costs, how and are those costs passed on through tuition dollars, the capturing of tuition dollars? So can you explain first off the quality enhancing activities? Is that?
Yeah, so first of all, again, in our model, and sort of integrating this hypothesis that's been going around, colleges want to improve their quality. That's what they care about. And we break that down to basically two things. They want really high quality academic students, and they like to spend money, the colleges, on quality enhancing activities. Now, there's a lot of disagreement as far as what qualifies as quality enhancing. And unfortunately, the data we have doesn't allow us to drill down and separate out some of those things, like improving the cafeteria versus some stuff in the classroom. I mean, it would be great to have that data. So we're somewhat agnostic on that, and we're taking it from the view of the college, right? So basically, we look at some broad categories of spending. That's what the college wants to raise because they think that improves their quality. Do students agree that that also improves the quality in their eyes? It's unclear, although, as you mentioned, there is evidence that there are students that make their decision largely based on amenities, while other students look at academic stuff. So if we were to, the counterfactual is what would have happened to tuition had loan limits not increased. And we find that tuition would not have gone up nearly as much. It still would have gone up, but not as much. But by the same token, that also means there would be fewer resources that the colleges would have to spend on these activities. So as far as welfare-wise, it's unclear, right? Are we better off in a world where students pay higher tuition, take on more debt, but get much more quality-enhancing activities while at college? Or would we be better off in a world where there's less debt, lower prices, but kind of fewer amenities and potentially lower other spending? People have views on that. We don't take a strong stand on that in the paper.
Yeah. So Andrew, views on that? Is there the sort of the arms race, and are these sort of costs being passed on to the students through tuition increases?
Just a couple thoughts on that first. So I do think one of the, again, if we're talking about heterogeneity across institutions, not all institutions actually do try and maximize the ability of their students. Some of them can't. Some of them are open access institutions. They don't have admission standards, right? they can place them in remediation, but like community colleges have to take all takers, right?
Right, and it's important. We do just look at four-year colleges.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So again, but this is part of the trick of writing down a model that explains behavior of all different types of institutions. You guys are. This is again not a criticism of your model. You have to make some calls on that, but it's just important to remember that there's not. I think there is evidence. The study that I think both Neal and Aaron are referring to is by Brian Jacob and some colleagues from Brian's at University of Michigan. That's the study of students' preferences for amenities, and there is a big set of colleges in the middle of the distribution. Right, they're hard to distinguish on any measure other than maybe what it looks like when you show up on campus. They look alike in terms of the types of students they admit. I think also some of what you see is that some of the private colleges, in order to compete with public colleges that are actually subsidized by the state, which lowers their tuition prices, that they have to sort of bump up some of their allure with students in the middle of this achievement distribution. So yeah, I think it's a real thing. I think it's a real thing. To me, I tend to think that the capital investments and other things like sports, right? These things that like we tend to overestimate their contribution to the rising. We tend to overestimate it because colleges, like every other big big public organization, in particular educational organization, they're really HR heavy, right? And it's most of the money is going to the people you hire. And oftentimes the buildings are actually sometimes proxies for hiring benches, right? And creating new things, creating new new career services offices, new tutoring services, and so on. And so and again, that the question is, are those quality enhancing or not? One of the things I would just raise is it's totally unclear to me, and you guys probably agree with this, that the rise in the earnings premium has anything to do with what we're actually doing on college campuses.
Right, so we do not take a stand as far as why the earnings premium has gone up.
Right.
All we can say is, look, when people graduate with a college degree, they get paid more relative to non-graduates compared to 25 years ago. Given that, why that happened, who knows? The demand for college is going to go up.
But that seems like an important question. Not that it's not relevant. Not that you guys could tackle it in your paper, but that's one of the things that I'm always struck by. Just sort of, if they're quality enhancing, we'd expect some of these steps to be related to that wage premium, and I just don't know that we have any evidence of that. Right?
I think most of the micro-based research suggests it's changes in like firm demand for skilled workers post-college. So not specifically something to do with colleges increasing ability of students or training of students, but more an increased demand for skilled workers.
In which case, you ask yourself the question: well, right? Could we be paying dramatically less, right, for a similar similar wage premium? Maybe not as large, right? But in terms of the cost structure of what we're providing, right?
Yeah, well, there's that. I mean, that's a whole question of credential inflation then. So, for one thing, I haven't looked at this in a while, but often you would have this college earnings premium where people wouldn't break out people who had a bachelor's degree, but then also people with above. When you do, at least last time I looked at it was several years ago, if you just have a bachelor's degree, there hasn't been a big increase, certainly not in your earnings. You see the high school only go down, but you actually, could very well be credential inflation because the real premium comes, now you've got to move on to advanced degrees. And then there was, I'm forgetting the name of this, it's an HR company, but they did a study, Burning Glass did this study 2 or 3 years ago, and I don't know how rigorous it was, but they were basically analyzing for a year, I think it was, want ads, and then the qualifications asked for in the want ads and the qualifications of people currently in those jobs, and found the want ads asked for degrees for jobs that really typically didn't require them, and that generally they couldn't find evidence that said, well, we need all these new additional skills you can only get in college. So I think that that's important. And lest I give the impression that it's all, the water parks and the climbing walls, I think that is the best sort of advertisement for the problem of too much money in higher education. But I think where you really see it and what you were alluding to is people tend to think, well, who's really getting rich off this is the professors. But that's not where the growth and the spending is. And
These guys can attest.
Yeah, I know. That's not where the growth in the spending and the earnings, it's in administrators. And so it's probably growing a lot of fiefdoms, lots of administrative offices. Some of that is no doubt student programming, things like that. But that seems to be where it's going, not necessarily into the educational direct learning component.
Thank you. That's a great pivot, because I want to examine something that's not necessarily discussed in the paper, which are regulatory burdens, right? So here at AAF, we've done some research in the past where we were able to sort of correlate the growth of regulatory burdens with the hiring of compliance officers. And our findings from that basically translated to an annual cost of $2.7 billion, right? There's been other studies recently that looked at a representative sample of 13 institutions of higher education and estimated an annual cost of $27 billion because of the regulatory burdens. So I'll open this up to any of you all. Can we talk a little bit about the pressures of the regulatory burdens and how they affect the cost and the price of college?
What I can tell you is this is not something I've looked a whole lot at, but I know there's a lot of dispute about it. So Vanderbilt had people come and testify at Congress. They said, oh, it's just crushing. Yeah. But a lot of that burden is attached to research that they willingly take on. And I think it's very hard, actually, to assess how tough the compliance burden is. And so there was a guy, Lee Fritzler, who used to run Dickinson College, President Dickinson. He's been higher ed for a long time, was in the Clinton administration. I had a class with him where he talked about his school, Dickinson, had an audit. And one of the things the auditors looked at was how compliant were they with all the regulations. So not just federal regulations, but state regulations, local regulations on fire codes. And they said, I won't get the numbers exactly right, but they said something like, you're only compliant with about 40% of the regulations. And he's like, oh, this is terrible. And I shouldn't have said only. They said you are compliant with about 40%. So, oh, this is terrible. And apparently the regulators said to him, the auditors, oh, that's actually great. You have all these regulations, so the fact of the matter is very few colleges can keep track of it, can comply with it. Maybe they don't even want to comply with it. So you can have all these regulations, but it gets hard to say who's obeying them and how much is stuff they kind of voluntarily get themselves involved with.
Yeah, Neal's right about that, and the Vanderbilt thing was, I thought, instructive, that they include a lot of things. They include a lot of federal reporting for research. The other thing that was striking was that when pressed in hearing, I think it was I might be getting this wrong. One of the administrators, they said, well, so what you're saying is if we rolled all this back, you would lower tuition. Right. And they said, no, we wouldn't. Because to Aaron's point, right, they would likely just reinvest that money in some other place that they see as quality enhancing, whether that's true or not.
Yeah, so one of the surprising things to come out of research is just because the cost of a college goes up, it doesn't mean that tuition is necessarily going to go up. There's different ways for a college to respond to that. One is you have fewer water parks, I guess. The other is you admit more students of lower ability to help cover these costs. So maybe reduce, if you hire a compliance officer, maybe it's $2 per student. Well, if you double the number of students, maybe that goes down to $1 per student. So it's not clear that cost increases from regulation are going to translate into higher tuition.
But I think that was actually the interesting part of the exercise. It's because of the richness in our model, we really didn't know exactly what was going to happen. It wasn't one of those things where it's sort of pre-programmed up to where you stick an increase in aid and it's like automatic that you're going to get increased tuition. So it's interesting to see that finding. Regarding the regulation, I'll just give you a sample size of one. Many people, which of course is scientifically valid, I'm sure many people here have heard of the University of Missouri, where I am from. I've been in the news a bit. And I don't want to say anything to irritate my employer, but just to give you an idea, because of some budget issues, we're about to be going into a hiring freeze. And yet, despite the hiring freeze, the university did recently hire a new position, a chief diversity officer, for $250,000 a year. And again, good or bad, not going to comment. But needless to say, part of the reason for that position is there's a lot of regulatory stuff that the university needs someone like, or says they need someone like that to help deal with.
I have a quick question for you, since you're from Missouri.
Okay.
The poster child for water parks, the one that started all, is Missouri's Tiger Grotto.
It's quite nice.
Is it nice? Yeah. I was going to ask.
It's pretty nice. Yeah, it's good.
Okay.
Good to bring your kids there.
Okay.
Yeah.
What's that? You can bring your kids there?
You can bring the kids. Yeah.
Do they still? There was a picture I saw years ago when it opened of people in Hawaiian shirts would bring you like smoothies and things they show all these students sitting on the pool side or the water park side and getting their smoothies delivered.
Well, that will definitely attract more students. I'm assuming higher applications. So let's try to rein it in, and let's turn to.
Let's all talk about our favorite amenity.
Let's turn to solutions. Let's get
I'll
this
let,
out of the way.
I'll let Neal go first, so I don't. On the off chance I steal his material again.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll be quick. I mean, the first thing I'd say was actually what Congresswoman Foxx said, which is, last thing we want is price controls. So this is what we hear talked about one way or another. They may not call it price controls, but both the Clinton campaign and the Sanders campaign, to different degrees, but with the same basic idea, would say the federal government should give money to states to have states spend more their own taxpayer money on colleges, so one way or another, the student didn't pay as much. The idea being we're going to essentially control the cost. And while I think our higher education system has huge problems, obviously the price is, almost obviously, thanks to your work, the price is probably artificially inflated. But it's still actually, I think the evidence is it works better than the other systems that we see in the rest of the world, which is sort of like our K through 12 system where the government supplies your school and you go for free. And what we find in those places is they're very impersonal. Customer service is not one of their things. They probably don't have one water park, just to bring it back to water parks. But it's hard to see a professor, even harder than it apparently is in American schools. They don't respond quickly to the needs of the labor market or of students. And so we don't want to go to that model. And then I'll probably say the thing that, I can say it because I work in a think tank, so I don't have to deal with political reality. But seems to me that the key to curbing price inflation is you've got to curb price inflating aid. I mean, that's the most direct lesson we get from these studies. And so just as a very kind of immediate, kind of brief outline, there are lots of details that will be needed here. Seems to me that the way you would do it is you slowly phase out aid, and as you do it, you want to more and more focus on the actual low-income students that we've been trying to help, supposedly. So, we have these tax incentives like Coverdale's and 529s, which are not well targeted to low-income people. They actually tend to be used by more upper-income people. I don't know why we would keep those, but the Obama administration, something I thought was a good proposal, said let's get rid of 529s. And I can say, even among libertarians, people said, this is an outrage. Why would you get rid of 529s? Because they're just encouraging you to they're not giving you money, they're encouraging you to save it. But it is still an artificial thumb placed on the scale to consume higher education. And since it's so poorly targeted, why not start getting rid of that? Then you'd get rid of the unsubsidized loans, that should be in quotes, because they're still subsidized, but they don't pay your interest while you're in school and part of the time after school. But they're not well targeted either. Think of Parent Plus loans. Those should go next. And then I would actually turn Pell into loans because we talk about the earnings premium. Why should somebody get a big increase in their earnings and not have to make whole the people from whom the money came, even though Pell is better targeted to lower-income people? I would end work study. It's not that big. Next. And then ultimately you'd end subsidized loans. Why? If there's this big earnings premium, a private lender would have an incentive to work with even someone low income because that person is going to end up earning more and that lender has a good likelihood of making a profit. Ultimately, what we need people to do is pay for college with their own money or money they get voluntarily from other people, and that can also include charity. Then you can have the flexibility, but you also have the accountability and an efficiency that you don't have in the current system.
So
Neal wants to phase it all out.
Phase it all out. Beg
Shorthand.
for your money. Phase it all
Shorthand,
out,
yeah.
and
Go out,
pull on your
go
bootstraps.
Hat in hand. Yeah, go hat in hand to the bank. No, I'm being totally pejorative. Neal's a friend, so I can do that. These guys are strangers, so I won't do that. I agree on the loan limits. In particular, I think one of the disservices that particularly conservatives have done is to not think, not disaggregate the loan programs into and think differently about how they have different implications because of their structure. Plus loans, unlimited borrowing up to the cost of attendance, right? Particularly for grad students. So when you look at the distribution of outstanding debt that has all the Democrats in a tizzy, right? This is the In the Red campaign. Some estimates suggest that 40% of that outstanding debt is for graduate school. We should not be worried about that. Those are the best off people in the country, right? I'm with Neal on reining in PLUS loans and doing away with them. I think that they distort the market. If anybody can get credit from the private market, it's somebody with a bachelor's degree who's planning on studying for a grad degree. And if you can't get a private loan for that grad degree, you probably shouldn't take it, right? I will say on that front, we're doing a paper now on private lending and the extent to which private lenders are or feel that they can be forward-looking in the way that you're describing, which is to take somebody's future income as part of their underwriting model. And the private lenders that we've talked with, this paper will be coming out probably in the next month or so, they're not positive that they can do that under fair lending because there's potential for disparate impact. So that would have to change for your model to work. One product that we've talked about as a private solution, if you were to get rid of PLUS loans, would be this income share approach, where a private lender fronts the money to a student in return for a percentage of their income over a fixed period of time. Mitch Daniels is starting this at Purdue. They just announced it this past week. That aligns the incentives of lenders and students in a way, because the lender only gets their money back if you do well, and they earn a premium if you do particularly well. You're protected. You get a protection in return for that upside. And then just lastly, I think we've all kind of danced around this a little bit by talking about the amenities and the quality enhancements, but changing the terms of competition. It's a hard thing to do in this industry, but changing the terms of competition from a place where colleges compete on amenities and the way they look to competing on measures of how much students learn, what the value added is of your investment in that place. Colleges can compete on things other than that, on proxies for that, if you will, because there's no information on these other measures. As Congresswoman Foxx said, we don't know how much students learn on a given campus. We do know that it varies from the limited research that's out there. Varies by campus, varies by major. So that's a much harder, longer game to change the terms of competition. But I think it's critical to curbing the rise in tuition and empowering consumers to buy what they to purchase what they want.
So out of respect for time, I'm going to go ahead and turn and open questions to the audience. Anyone?
Could I say one thing first? So if I were going to try to fix this problem, I think one of the main things I would do is have more transparency. So the ideal would be, I'm a potential student, I choose a school, I enter my SAT score, my GPA, I don't know. Any extra information you have, you could put in there, and it will spit out, what is my dropout rate? My expected dropout rate, because that's a huge problem. 50% of people don't complete school in 6 years, so that's a huge risk. And also, if I do go to this school and I make it, what can I expect to earn post college? So those are like two critical features I think students need to make informed decisions and to sort of shift this competition potentially away from limestone-covered parking garages to things that will increase their earnings potential down the road.
So Andrew, you've actually written on that. Do you want to talk a little bit about sort of the failures of the current sort of college scorecards and what type of data that we could actually use to improve, to improve and provide some sort of system where parents and students could turn to and get the information they need to make the most informed decision on choosing.
Yeah, so Neal and I disagree on this, and we've battled it out on panels before. So at the risk of monopolizing the rest of the session, with us bickering or me filibustering for that matter, I think that some states have started to collect information on labor market returns in particular. They've linked up unemployment insurance records with post-secondary records, and they're able to track students out into the labor force. So Florida does this, Texas does this, Colorado, Arkansas, Missouri, Minnesota, Indiana doesn't, I don't think, yet. California does it for its community colleges. What's nice about that is that it gives you an expectation about what students who graduate from that program earn in the labor market. There's obviously massive selection problems with that, right? And they don't claim that it's a causal estimate. They're just trying to give you a basic sense as to what you might earn, which we would expect would influence people's willingness to invest. The other thing that data like this can do is inform some of the underwriting process, right, for private lenders. So to the extent private lenders want to be forward-looking and say we're willing to lend more for this type of program, they need some certainty that that program actually does deliver the return that they think. There's problems with relying on the states to do it, which is that they can't follow people across state lines. And they also don't have data for federal employees. So in states with large federal employee populations, they don't have any idea. So what you wind up with in some places is a flagship campus that doesn't look nearly as good as you'd expect given their inputs, because a lot of their students leave the state. And so the ones that are left behind are a selected group that may have lower earnings potential. So I've argued in the Wall Street Journal and elsewhere that the federal government is uniquely positioned to collect these data because they're the only organization that can follow students across state lines. They have wage information from the Social Security Administration, and so that's a very controversial position. Congresswoman Foxx has been dead set opposed to that idea, and as has Neal.
So Neal,
Do I get a rebuttal?
the dangers of the federal government collecting all this data and their ability to sort of manipulate that data and sort of drive students or decisions towards outcomes that they're seeking.
Yeah, first I'll say I'm not an expert on all the privacy stuff. A lot of this is a concern that just this data will be collected somewhere, may leak out, may be stolen. We know the federal government has had, the Department of Education itself has had problems collecting data, but protecting data, that's not really my area. My concern is that we will see this sort of data collected and one will not be able to tell us everything we need to know. There's a tendency, I'm critical of lots of colleges, but there's a tendency to say, if this college's students have high debt and they don't get jobs, there's something wrong with that college. And we don't ever say, well, what are the students doing? Why aren't we looking at the students? And so there's going to be a tendency to say, well, this school's no good because their students do worse than other students. And we could put in things like SAT and GPA and things like that, but there's still lots of unobservable things that we don't know, unobservable variables to say, well, how do we know that these kids, people disproportionately go to college X, even if they have the same SAT as somebody who goes to Y? How do we know that they don't come from a different sort of family background, or something's happened in their lives because of the area where they live? So there's a big problem of assigning outcomes to a school when it's in fact the students they're teaching or that they're working with that are leading to those outcomes. And that's a big problem with the college scorecard. And I know you're not a big fan of the college scorecard right now either. You say, well, okay, here's college X. We know that their graduates, X% finish in 6 years, and that they tend to earn a wage that's, plus or minus whatever versus a high school graduate. Therefore, you can conclude that this is a good or bad college, and you can't. And then the other maybe the most dangerous part about that is politicians will tend to cherry pick that data and use it against whatever sector they don't like. So if you look at for-profit colleges and you look generally at who they're working with, it's no surprise at all that they get worse outcomes than four-year schools. Totally different student populations for the most part. Even working with much more disadvantaged students than community colleges. But we've seen that things like default data, without any context, has been used to hammer for-profit schools because it's easy to demonize the guys who say, honestly, they want to make a profit. And so I'm very concerned that you're not getting the rigor that we think we're getting just because we can put numbers on something, and we're handing a weapon to people to say, let's go after the schools you don't like and beat them over the head.
Great. One more shot, audience participation. Anyone? Anyone will join me thanking the panelists for their participation. Thank you. Guys, good job.
Yeah. Thanks.
We were well behaved that
There we
time.
see.
Yeah, I don't think anybody was in any danger.
What do you think? What do you think?